If you watched our video posted 2 weeks ago called 358 Statements to be Styled, you're expecting to see an online conversation between myself and Dunya, an essential oil educator with doTERRA Essential Oils. You're not wrong. However, due to many technical frustrations, we had to go on to Plan B. Hello, I'm Karen. I'm a Canadian content creator and the host here at Fully Fashionista on YouTube. We are also on Instagram and Facebook, and we invite you to like and follow us there. So, what is Plan B? Well, as my regular viewers know, we don't have any videos posted yet in the film section here at Fully Fashionista. For those just new to us, we have 4 categories: fashion, fun, focus, and film. As time was ticking by, I knew I needed a movie that would help me relax, but also remind me that Plan B can also be a good thing. The perfect movie? The Devil Wears Prada. This is one of my personal favorites, and it stars one of my favorite movie actors of all time, Meryl Streep. Meryl Streep plays Miranda Priestly, the editor of Runway magazine. It's interesting to note that she got inspiration for this character by watching Clint Eastwood and how Clint Eastwood commands the scene that he's in. He's soft-spoken, and you will see that inspiration come all the way through this movie. Opposite Meryl Streep is Anne Hathaway, playing the role of Andrea Andy Sachs, who is a writer who has come to New York to get into the publishing business. However, after a year of no's, she is now applying for the job of Miranda's second assistant. Interesting to note here, Anne Hathaway wasn't the first choice for the role, which is hard to believe because she's so good in it. The first choice was Amy Adams. However, Amy turned it down. Now, there's a third character I'm going to cover in this synopsis of the movie, and that is Nigel. Nigel is played by Stanley Tucci, and he does an amazing job in this character. I think of the whole movie, Nigel might be my favorite. Now, this script is very well written and it's very fast moving. There are no moments you want to miss because something is happening at all times, and that includes as the movie starts. You want to have your popcorn and your beverage sitting with you as you hit the start button, because this movie begins as soon as those credits start to roll. The opening scene is Andy taking the steam off of her bathroom mirror while brushing her teeth, getting ready for her day. We also have scenes of other women preparing for their day, and you will notice the sharp contrast between them. As Andy finishes up getting ready, she's packing a brown bag with her portfolio. Remember, she's a writer, and we can start to see that she is preparing for her interview. As Andy arrives at Elias Clark Publishing, she makes her way to the floor where Runway magazine is located, and the first person she meets is Emily. Emily is Miranda Priestly's first assistant, and the insult and berating starts from the moment these two meet. Poor Andy. I don't even know how she continued to go to the interview. However, she seems to be kind of at bliss about the whole thing and not noticing what's happening. That's one of the wonderful qualities of this character. As she's walking into Miranda's office, Emily rips the bag from her hand, advising her she can't take that in there because it's brown, and Miranda hates the color brown. It's interesting to note that Andy's jacket is also a shade of brown, and that will come to play later at the end of the movie. Andy walks into this interview and she's somewhat naked. She's a writer and she has no portfolio. The interview gets underway and suddenly Nigel bursts into the door, and he's already halfway through a conversation towards Miranda, and he goes by poor Andy like she's absolutely invisible, and he keeps talking to Miranda. Finally, Andy decides the interview's over and she excuses herself, and as she leaves, Nigel says to Miranda, he inquires, "Who is that sad person, and are we doing a before and after piece that someone forgot to tell me about?" These words are foreshadowing for what comes later on in the movie, and Nigel is a character who has a lot of these lines. Nigel is also the character who becomes Andy's one and only friend at Runway magazine. As Andy continues in her role as second assistant to Miranda Priestly, The berating continues, but one was extra cruel, and on this day she was called into Miranda's office, and by the end of the berating, Andy could not stand it any longer. She had to get out, and somehow she finds her way to Nigel's office, his studio actually, and she starts to pour her heart out to Nigel, but Nigel will not give in and give her the pity party she's looking for. No, he makes her rethink the position because this is a job that many girls wanted to have, but somehow Andy got it. She thinks it through, and you see the light goes on. Nigel is absolutely right. All of a sudden she says, Nigel, Nigel, Nigel. Nigel does it, but begrudgingly. He gives Andy the makeover she needs and desires. After her makeover is done, Andy goes back to the office, and there's Emily, who cannot believe her eyes. Andy is rocking the outfit, but mostly those Chanel boots. Later that night, Andy meets her boyfriend, Nate, and he doesn't even recognize her as she stands on the street. It's the beginning of the new Andy. The story continues to unfold, and the friendship between Nigel and Andy continues, and it does grow. One day at a photo shoot, Andy is talking to Nigel, and she says, oh yeah, my personal life is hanging by a thread. And Nigel, once again, is not going to give in and give her the pity party she's looking for. He tells her to wait until it looks like it's going to go up in smoke. That usually means something good's going to happen on the job, maybe a promotion. It wasn't a promotion that was coming Andy's way. It was a trip to Paris for Fashion Week. Now, this trip to Paris is always taken with Miranda by the first assistant, but circumstances have made Miranda to change her mind. Now, the lovely part about it when Miranda tells Andy that she will be coming to Paris for Fashion Week is that Miranda tells Andy she's the one that's going to tell Emily, not Miranda. When Andy finally tells Emily that she will be going to Fashion Week and not Emily, Emily is not very pleased, as you can tell, and she says, I knew it. Emily saw her sell her soul, she says, when you put on your first pair of Jimmy Choos. Andy knew that Emily was right. There are big changes happening in her, and this whole trip to Paris is where those changes really start to come to the forefront. Andy's life, her personal life, is hanging by a thread, and she and Nate do decide to part ways for a while. This trip to Paris, maybe it's come at the right time. While in Paris, Andy is kept very busy working for Miranda. And one evening, she paid a visit to Miranda, who was in her suite and had no makeup on and a dressing gown. And you could tell Miranda was deep in thought. She was mulling something over in her mind. And Andy is very quiet as she approaches Miranda because they have to reconfigure some sitting for a dinner that's going to take place later that evening. But Miranda then tells Andy that her husband has just filed for divorce, and I believe this will be the third divorce in Miranda's life, and that Jacqueline, who is part of the Runway family, is no longer speaking to her. There is more to that story, and Miranda knows what it is. It's because they're trying to take over Miranda's position and give it to Jacqueline. Miranda was aware of this even before she got to Paris. Andy has no idea. With the work done, Andy is down in her own suite. She has some free time now, and Nigel comes in and he's got a bottle of bubbly. They're going to celebrate. Nigel is going to be working with James Holt, the designer, and he's leaving Runway magazine. He's so excited. Next time he comes to Paris, he exclaims, he'll be actually able to see the city instead of just inside the hotel rooms and offices. Celebration is short-lived. The next day at a luncheon, when Nigel's ready to hear his name announced by Miranda that he will be leaving to go with James Holt, it is Jacqueline's name announced. At this time, everything comes crushing down on not only Nigel, but on Andy. Nigel is her only friend at Runway, and he has just been devastated by Miranda. Andy is talking to Miranda later as they ride in the limo, and Miranda says, well, everybody wants to be us. And then she goes on to say to Andy that Andy reminds her of a younger Miranda, and that Andy is no different than Miranda. She's already done what Miranda's done to Nigel. She did it to Emily before they came to Paris. The reality sets in, and Andy knows she needs to make some changes. When they get out of the limo on way to another one of the events, Miranda makes her way up the stairs, but Andy walks across the street, throws her company cell phone into a fountain, and you know she's about to make her way back to New York. As we see Andy on her return to New York, it's a much changed Andy. The outfit that she's wearing is a reflection of what she wore in the beginning of the movie. Jeans, a brown jacket, some boots, and a brown bag. But it is tailored and it is styled. Andy has learned how to style her statement. She gets that writing job at a publication in New York at the interview, and she meets Nate for lunch, and they decide they're going to work on their relationship, even though Nate will now be living in Boston. As Andy's walking away from her interview later in that scene, she walks in front of the Elias Clark building, and who should be coming out towards her limo but Miranda Priestly. The two women hold a look between each other across the busy street, and it's a look of respect and admiration. It's interesting to note here that part of the reason Andy got her new job is because Miranda Priestly gave her a glowing recommendation. There is a respect from Miranda to Andy and from Andy to Miranda. And that's the end of the movie. Plan B. She's a writer, but she took a different type of job and she learned so much about herself. You know Andy was going to go on to be a successful writer. I hope you've enjoyed my little synopsis of The Devil Wears Prada in this video, The Devil and Plan B. If you have, let me know in the comments below. I'd also be interested to know if you have any favorite movies that you like to watch when things don't go well and you have to go to Plan B. Until we meet again, this is Karen for Fully Fashionista, reminding you to style your statement every day.